Okay, right. Great. So he's wealthy. What other impression do you get of Naval? So how do you get that impression so far, just from what we've read so far? Right. So this is a good example where, often biblical narrative, which is very terse, and most of the ways in which we learn about biblical characters are by watching them act and by listening and reading closely to how they speak and what they say and how they speak. And but in this case, you can see that the narrator is setting us up, and very explicitly, there's no ambiguity about these characters from the beginning, even before we see what's going to happen in describing their characteristics. And I want to look at here, this just kind of flag this description of him as kashet. So what would you, like, how do you read that? What does it mean to be a hard person? And anyone on Zoom, if you use the raise hand feature. Okay, we're definitely gonna, so the response there was difficult to get along with, which we'll definitely see as we go along. And if people could also, I don't know everyone's into, just say your name, so also the folks on Zoom know who's. Yeah, that's a long time back. Okay, so and also that's also helpful for the folks on Zoom to know who's commenting. So definitely hard to get along with. We're definitely going to see that. Edon. Nice. So also stubborn and inflexible. Those are other qualities we're going to see, Jason. Good. So this is an important way in the Bible that biblical narrative teaches us about characters, is characterization through contrast. So we're going to see a number of examples of contrasting dialogue. That's also a way that the Bible efficiently gives us more depth about characters by putting them in contrast. So there's clearly a contrast here between Naval, who's portrayed negatively, and Abigail, who is portrayed positively. And we'll see that the nature of the characteristics that they have is different. So you'll see, and what's interesting here is we have kashet, which is here this figurative description, but then we have more specifically here this description of evil in his deeds in a more non-figurative way. And then we have this description. Notice that we have well, let me also talk about, even before the narrator tells us anything about him, the word, his name itself conveys a lot of information. So Naval here, we see, and a good example of what we know about that word here. This is not just, a random name here, the name in which definitely conveys his character. And in fact, Abigail is going to make that explicit a little bit later on when she says, she's going to say here, basically like he's like his, yeah, he's like his, where am I? Yeah, if you look on page 4, verse 25, she's going to say Naval is his name, and Nevelah is with him. So basically, like that's made explicit later on. So this verse from Isaiah 32 is a good example here of kind of here is translated as bore, or this kind of definitely gives us a sense of what his character is. So from his name, and then we have the description here where we have the Ketiv and the Kri, and you can see that in this translation, which this is I've taken from Tikva Primer-Kensky, has a really excellent reading of this chapter in her book Reading the Women of the Bible, which I feel Tikva Primer-Kensky, who passed away, Zichronah Livracha, a number of years ago, but really left this important legacy in that book, Reading the Women of the Bible, which I think was her last book. So you see that it's translated here in the Cree, Kalibi. He's a Calebite, meaning a man from the tribe of Caleb. So that's his, or from the clan there. But what would it mean to read it like the Ketiv? How would you translate that if we read it there, Kalibo? Like his heart, right? Okay, so now what's going to be significant? We're going to see if we skip to the very end of the chapter here. Look at on the page 6 in verse 37. This is at the very end of the story. We see what happens. Vayamot libo. The kirbo vahu haya le'aven. So now think about the kashet, because what is the quality of an even, of a rock, is hard, and his heart, in this case, becomes hard. So there's definitely, you can see the play there to say that he is like his heart is going to become hard, and we have this description of him as hard. So definitely that translation would work as well. So we get a lot of information about Naval, and the negative impression that we get from these early verses is definitely going to play out in the verses that follow as we watch him act. But let's take a minute to look at Abigail, his wife, who's also introduced. And take a look here on the second half of page 1 at the other, as the other examples where we find this description of other characters who are described here, Yafat, Toar, or kind of various forms of that. So we see this description of Rachel, of Joseph, of Bathsheba, and also from Esther. So take a minute, look at those, and think about how those descriptions where we see some of the similar language, how does that compare to the description of Abigail in verse 3?
I would never realize that the Seichel was mentioned first. That is so cool.
Right, so elaborate a little bit. What makes that cool to you?
So often, we can describe for their intelligence. The idea of describing a woman by her intelligence first, and not just intelligence, the Seichel is also common sense. Because clearly, this is in his story, and it's pretty amazing, and especially all the other examples you give, don't mention intelligence at all.
Right. So that's what's really noteworthy. So as you said, sort of the two things, both the order that what's highlighted is her intelligence, and we are going to see again that description is absolutely going to play out. She's going to take her intelligence to get to the end of the story and the outcome that she wants. And the fact that it is, and in all of these other cases where other biblical characters are described as beautiful, but there's no mention there of intelligence. So that's also particularly noteworthy. And it's also, the phrasing here, Tovat Seichel, is noteworthy. Notice that, well, in part, it again sets up the contrast, because elsewhere we have Tovat Mareh, goodly in appearance. So it's not that, it's Seichel instead, but it's also not wisdom. And that's because elsewhere, it was a role of the wise woman, this was sort of a kind of a professional position. So we have in 2 Samuel 14, we read about the Isha Hachama, the wise woman in Tekoa, or also in 2 Samuel 20, the wise woman here of, we have another example of a wise woman, Isha Hachama, so of the city there. So we have other examples where that was a specific role. So she doesn't have that role of a wise woman. She's using here her intelligence. Okay, any questions, other observations about these introductory verses? Okay, so let's dive into the next part then, and we're going to see, now we're going to meet David as he enters into the story. And and see how, see what happens here. So you can see in verse 4 tells us that David discovers that Nabal is shearing his sheep, and he's going to send Vayishlach David. Those who have studied, I for many years taught a class in literary artistry of the Bible, and we studied the David and Bathsheba story where the verb yishlach and the power of the king to send. So this is a very someone in authority has the power to send and to dispatch other people to do things. That plays a big role in the David and Bathsheba story. So we'll see this. So it seems like an ordinary verb just by yishlach, but here it's definitely a position of power that David has to be able to send other people to be able to do things. So he's going to send here his 10 lads, and he tells them, and we're going to pick this up in the middle of verse 5. He commands them, so Alu Carmela, go up to Carmel, Uvatem el Naval, go to Naval, and here Ushe'altem lo bishmi l'shalom. So he's going to ask there about their well-being, and I should have highlighted that the last shalom in that verse in red, because we're going to see that's going to continue. So that's the setup. He's sending his men to go inquire after him. Now that seems quite, benign and sort of just the polite thing to do, right? Go find out how's Nabal doing when he's shearing his sheep. But we're going to see in a minute that sort of David's outward motivation for going to Nabal to check in, see how he's doing, right? Inquire about his well-being is that's his outward motivation. But let's think about what does David really want here. So if I could get a volunteer to read here 6 to 8, and we'll see this. And this is an example here of, this is sort of the embedded dialogue where he's going to say specifically, this is what he wants his lads to say. He's kind of putting the words in their mouth. And then again, this is the efficiency of biblical narrative. We're not going to hear the lads actually say that to Nabal. The narrator will just tell us in verse 6, they said this. So this is David creating this speech that he's going to want his servants or one of his servants to say to Nabal. So if someone wants to pick it up in verse 6. Oh, okay. So we can, yeah, so if someone can come up to read, someone wants to read? A volunteer? Okay, great. 6 to 8, if you'll read that. 6 to 8, all right.
Starting here?
Yeah.
Ve'amartam kol echai le'ata shalom uveitcha shalom v'chol asher lecha shalom. Ve'ata shamati ki gozazim lach ata haroim asher lecha hayu imanu lo hechlamnum v'lo nifkad lahem me'uma kol yemei heyotam b'karmel. She'al et na'arecha va'yagidu lach va'yimtzeu hana'arim chen be'enecha ki al yom tov banu t'na'ana et asher timtza yadcha le'avadecha ulevincha leDavid.
Thanks. So how would you summarize here what the message that David is having his messengers convey to Nabal? You were to summarize it in your own words. And again, if anyone who's joining us on Zoom wants to raise a hand to participate. Yeah. And if, okay, good. So a couple of things that, and you're, Michael, so noted. So how are you taking here this emphasis here? Ata shalom, uveitcha shalom, uvacho asher lecha shalom. What is the impact of repeating that? Okay, good. So Michael pointed out, so that repeating the shalom is both emphasizing like we're coming in goodwill. They're not coming in. Remember, you kind of picture these lads. These are, you know, this is this kind of guerrilla band. So they might be this intimidating group, even of the 10 of them. So they emphasize that they're coming, they're seeking their well-being. They're, just as David said here, inquiring about their well-being. How are you? How's your house? You know, how's it going? Kind of also buttering them up here. And then you described here, but summarizing what they really said. So they're both, in this case, but also asking for protection or asking for payback for the protection that they had provided in the past. Other thoughts about how both either what David is saying in this speech that he's having through his lads and how else he's saying them. How would you characterize both here, not only what he's asking, but also how would you characterize the tone of the message?
It feels to me like extortion. I heard, I think that the setting of the messengers saying, I heard you were hearing. So far, I haven't roughed up your checkers. So, given that, why don't you see what you want to give to me? Feels a lot more threatening.
Right, but you can see then this dissonance between the content of the message, sort of the explicit content, which seems kind of like, how are you doing? Hey, by the way, I hear you're sheep shearing. And just as a reminder, while you were out, we provided this protection for you. And why don't you please, so notice here the language here, Tanana, please give us what you might. Like on the surface level, kind of polite, nice, like, you know, we came back, by the way, reminder, we protected you here. Why don't you please give us a little something? But what he's really but described it as extortion. That's what's behind it. That's the other message. Robert Alter writes about this verse, this passage. He says, there's a certain ambiguity as to whether David was providing protection out of sheer goodwill or conducting a protection racket in order to get the necessary provisions for his guerrilla band. So meaning like the intention was not just out of goodwill to protect them, but he intended at the end, even though it obviously wasn't explicit, because the arrangement wasn't, we'll protect you at the end of the sheep shearing, you'll give us X, Y, or Z. Now, after the fact, they're coming and saying, we did this for you, and now give us something in return. Michael.
One of the wealthiest people in the land who are hoping like they put it on the violence and everyone will see this warfare. They just commit violence on our people who aren't in it, right? So they can't even trying to keep their lives. Their son is we just need hoping.
Good. So Michael made it, and I'll try to summarize the good point you made, which is also about what, now remember, David's on the ascent, right? He hasn't officially become king, but I think what you're highlighting is not only as a guerrilla band, but also as a king, as a sort of soon to be king, that part of what he wants to be doing is winning the hearts of the people. So for him, and whether he's conscious about it or not, we don't know, but trying to make the impression to win the hearts of the people. So not coming in and, you know, kind of more explicitly demanding. He's noticed he's using rhetoric here to try to and get them to give. He has the goal in mind that he wants them to give him stuff, but trying to get it implicitly and have them give it up. I want to, Michelle Stern has her hand raised, so I want to give her a chance.
I think that the question of extortion fits in with David's general way of being as he moves through his kingship in terms of how he how he manages strategically from a distance, and also he always sends people, but he's also very strategic in how he plays around with different people in order to get what he wants. So I think extortion is certainly a possibility based on later stories, even Bathsheba, like with that story and with the husband. So I think this all fits with his personality.
Did you hear, did that pick up on the mic? Did you hear this? So the kind of, so that Michelle Stern made the comment that this fits in a pattern of behavior that we see for David, of how he's essentially in the Bathsheba story, of how he's trying to get people. And if you think about how he is there with Bathsheba's husband and trying to get him, but also to note unsuccessfully, getting her husband to come back and sleep with his wife, which isn't in fact what he's able to do. So how he's trying to, the ways in which he's able to explicitly use power, and the ways in which he is kind of in more lighter mode, which he's not always successful. And if you could introduce yourself too.
Michael Bullitt. Is there any significance in verse 7 to the use of the Weiss? That struck me that now it doesn't need find maybe that extortion power play.
So I had originally had that word highlighted too, but wanted to not make it too crazy in the colors. So watch for Ve'ata later in the story and think about let's come back to that. So watch for how how Abigail uses ata, and think about it. Well, any initial impressions of what in this kind of speech, the ve'ata functions here?
It may be a marker that, the way it's been so far doesn't necessarily have to continue. But now it's a different situation. Now I'm going to need some payment, or there's not going to be so much shalom going.
Right, and right. So both like now and then. So and it also so let's come back. So watch for it a little bit, and we'll see how it we'll see how it plays out there. So, but it is worth noting that ata also in this kind of a speech again. And so what I want you to see here is the polite tone of it. So this is also something that we're going to see again in the speech as it's presented here. So both the repetition of shalom, how their well-being, the use of we have the use of na twice in verse 8. I think also notice also what is the register when at the end of this speech, David refers to himself as, he refers to he has the servant, David's lad refer to themselves as avadecha, your servants, and ulavincha leDavid, and to the reference to David here as his son. What is the impact? How does that fit with the rest of the tone of the passage? And also one other piece to add to that list of kind of that gives us a sense of what kind of language is here. Also notice the use of here also in verse 8, may they find favor in your eyes. How would you characterize those different types of those different parts of the piece? What is David doing when he refers to himself as your son, David? Yeah. Right, it's used there as well in a similar kind of context of being deferential, right? So David is placing himself. So notice all of this, how the na, the yimsachen, right? These are all the register of this speech is very polite and also deferential. That he's to describe his men as servants, himself as the son. He's placing himself in this subservient relationship, and they're elevating also Nabal. Yeah, good. Right, you're creating this familiar bond with the son.
I just noticed as well that and the servants go talk to Nabal. And my David's servants are going to tell Nabal, now you ask your servant, right? So it seems to be that from David's perspective, he's trying to put Nabal on the same level as his own servants. So when he says on your servants, that deals a lot more like rhetorical. Also, the justification that seems to be more insulting.
You mean,
Rather than sending David's servants to Nabal's servants, he sends David's servants to Nabal directly.
right, and that's a question of why doesn't David go directly?
Right.
And what's the, so why that move? Is it less threatening? Does he, again, this is thinking that he's more likely, he wants to get, the outcome that he wants is to get what he wants, right? He wants the financial benefits, the reaping the rewards of the sheep shearing. And obviously thinks it's going to be more effective to send the 10 men than for him to go. You don't.
Might he also be a voting that they're both
Yeah, so kind of that sort of familial language of definitely seeing them kind of related, right? So that, yeah, I guess the question is, we'd have to see does, right, is it also used, is it used mainly hierarchically or also familial? So where does that, so we'd have to do a little concordance work to figure that one out. Yeah, so let's see now how David's, no, I do have my computer, but okay, so that's the instruction. So I mentioned before about the efficiency of biblical narrative. One of the ways that we gain a lot of information is here we have the instructions, say this, and now we have a case where those instructions are carried out, and we can compare how do the original instructions compare to how they're carried out. So, so now let's see what happens. And notice, so verse 9 tells us that David's men, they go and they speak exactly as exactly as David said, B'Shem David, and then they rested. Now we're going to see Naval. So, so let me, if I could get two readers who want to come up. Someone who wants to read the Naval piece in verses 10 and 11, and then someone, the narrator, and then which tells us David's response to it. So if I could get two volunteers. You can pick if you want to be Naval or David here. And someone else to read, will you take Naval in verses 10 and 11? And someone who wants to read anyone on Zoom want to read the David piece for us? You can raise your hand. Okay, you don't think. Okay.
וירא נבל את עבדי דוד ויאמר מי דוד ומי בן ישי היום רבו עבדים המתפריצים איש מפני אדוניו. ולקחתי את לחמי ואת מימי ואת טבחתי אשר טבחתי לגוזי ונתתי לאנשים אשר לא ידעתי מזה חמה.
ויהפכו נערי דוד לדרכם, וישובו, ויבואו, ויגידו לו ככל הדברים האלה. ויאמר דוד לאנשיו, חיגרו איש את חרבו.
Right, so I love all the good readers here, so thank you. Okay, so let's take a look. This is definitely a case of characterization through contrast, where how Naval responds. So we've talked a lot about what David's impression, how he was intending with this both sending his men and the nature of the speech, what he was intended. How would you characterize Naval's response? How would you? And the other question I want to ask, you can think about it at the same time, is what is the effect of all of the first person language in verse 11, which I've highlighted in in the red there, all of these references to the first person. So what's the tone of the response, and what does this convey about Naval? Right. Right. So this big emphasis on the first person. So very self-centered. Other thoughts? Okay, what kind of language does he use to disrespect him? Right. Right, exactly. Right, so notice the play here. David is describing his men as servants. That's figurative language, right? That's language that's meant to be deferential. But Naval is taking it literally, meaning like there's all these runaway slaves. So he's saying literally, this guy is like a runaway slave a runaway servant. And this is the guy. Who is this guy? And this is the guy I'm going to give my stuff to. Good. So completely dismissive. He definitely isn't. He doesn't have the seichel to know what's coming, and therefore that he might want to. So he's definitely no clue that David is going to be the king, and that he might. And even whether or not David becomes king, what might be the ramifications of his actions? So arrogant, dismissive. Ari.
Hi there. I don't know if this was said, but that was my first read. He's just saying this is a nobody. But isn't it true that David was the servant of Shaul and he has run from him? Is it possible that he knew that and he was just throwing that insult in his face even more? I mean, I don't know that that's likely with all the people around, the danger that he's putting himself in, but I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, so Ari Margolis made a great point, which is in some effect, like it is true. He is that. So that's a really great point that he hadn't thought about, but in some ways that he is on the run, exactly as he said. So that's a good point. Jeffrey, did you have your? Yeah.
Sure. Hi. Right. I mean, the other thing is like sometimes people say like, who is this person? Where they know perfectly well who the person is. And I don't know if it's supposed to be ambiguous here or not. And in the full context, I don't recall. But my impression, at least, is that Naval knows exactly who he is, but just does not want to acknowledge that he does. My older brother did this to me all the time. That my friends, who is that? I don't know who that is. But no, it seems like David knows, or Naval knows who David is, but he just will not acknowledge, cannot bring himself with his pride and selfishness to acknowledge this upstart.
Okay, so this is Jeffrey Weil who made the point that Naval, in fact, may actually very well know who David is, but by saying who is this guy, sort of deliberately dismissing him, putting him down by saying, who is this? And I love like also at the end where he says, Amy's to give you want me to give what I've given to like this men who come from I don't know where. Okay, so that's Naval. I want to keep somewhat mindful of the time here. So you can see how sarcastic, incredulous, the contrast that set up that we have here, and then David's response. So first, let's look at, so notice the contrast in length. So both, if you look in verse 13, David's response is 4 words, right? So both contrast that in length to the much longer speech that he gives to his servants, and also then contrast with Naval's speech. So David, so how would you characterize David's language in verse 13 versus the language in verses 6 to 8? Yeah, you can see stripped of all artifice of, he's just like, he's no longer trying to use language to get what he wants. Now he just orders, and he's direct and to the point, and he's actually using his physical weapons instead of the weapon of language, because it hasn't worked out for him to get what he wants, to try to convince and to persuade Naval to give him what he wants. So instead, now he's going to resort to violence. So he sends, and now it's not just 10 men, but now we see his real power in that he sends his 400 men and then the 200 that remain back. So the question, is there any significance to them being referred to as? Yeah, so that's a good question about whether the 10 Ne'arim are more like messengers and then these are fighting men. So that, right. It's a good observation. Nice close reading, Michael.
And one intimidating individual. And now all the men are going forward.
Yeah, and in great number. So also the contrast too, between 10, that was a definite strategy just to send a few. And now he's like bringing the big guns here, bringing them. Okay, so let's see what now it gets good. Okay, so that now one of Naval's lads, we're going to see what happens next, goes to Abigail and is going to tell what happened. So this is a great example where we can compare what David tells his men to say to Naval, that was in verse 7, to what Naval's servant says to Abigail. So this is our second example of someone who is using language to try to get someone to act. In this case, Naval's servant, who is again powerless, he's going to use so he has nothing else but to use his language to try to persuade Abigail to take action. Because what we know is that David and his men, this 400 men, are ready for battle and they're on their way. And we know already that his men have vowed to destroy. We're going to learn here that we know here that David and his men have vowed to destroy him. So if you skip ahead to look on the top of page 4, you'll see that this is the vow that David has made. So that you can understand what's at stake here, vowing that he's going to destroy every single person. Mm-hmm.
Oh, Savior, it seems really very shocking to me that servants would go to the wife of their master rather than to the master. It implies all sorts of things about the family, the relationships, and the power structure within that setting, that they would dare to go to her and expect her to, in fact, have influence under such circumstances. I can't think of another time, not only in the Bible, but other places where you see something like that happen.
Good. So that's a good point that Paul makes about them, that the servants are going to Abigail, not to Naval. He's useless. So, but because that could have been an attempt, they could have gone to him and said, wait, that was your initial response. Let's talk about this. Maybe you'll respond differently. They don't do that. They go right to Abigail. Yeah. Right, right. Yeah, good. So the point here that was made that's the narrator sets us up as someone who's kasher and is not going to, we talked about this, Guidon mentioned sort of unyielding or inflexible. So take a minute to read to yourself verses 14 to 17 and think about it. And if you have a pen or something else, the ways in which what is different? What's the same? And I've partly pointed a little bit with the colors here, but what is the same? And more importantly, what's different about what does Naval's servant add when he's telling Abigail what happened before? So take a minute to read that to yourself. Okay, so let's see what you found out. What did you see? So you can see from the highlighting here where the wording is almost identical as he's recounting what happened. But what's different about what the servant says to Abigail? What does he add? What does he change? You don't. Okay, and how does he say that? Okay, right. So notice that is one thing. This is in verse 16. One thing that we see in this passage. So notice in verse 15, he says, using non-figurative language, Ha'anashim tovim lanu me'od. So he says explicitly, they were very good to us. And then the description there about they didn't take anything from us. And then in using figurative language in verse 16 to emphasize here that point of how good they were and to describe the kind of protection they provided, he says they were a wall around us. So this is the second example of figurative language that we find in this verse. This is also this chapter. My doctoral dissertation was on figurative language in the Bible, and this was the main chapter of that work. And I got interested in it in part because of the use of figurative language that we find here. That's the second case. So him emphasizing the point about how much they protected by using this metaphor to say they were a wall around us. So both figuratively and non-figuratively making that point of how good and the kind of protection they provided. That's the second metaphor that he uses. What's the first metaphor? The eye, right? So he says, so this is where he's characterizing Naval's reaction. This is in the end of verse 14, where he sets up a contrast that David came levarech et Adonenu. He came to bless us. So certainly that's how he understood that. And let's see how you can see here. Tigran Merkensky translate this as to greet our master, but it's definitely levarech is a loaded word, right? There are other, so kind of it carries even more positive associations. And then she translates there, he swooped down on them. But the verb here, vaya'at, you can see comes from, it's a denominative verb that comes from the noun ait, which is a bird of prey. So I have spent far more time than anyone would imagine studying birds of prey and contemplating and writing about what does it mean to be so if he was a bird. So what are the interpretive possibilities? Any of my students will recognize that phrase. What are the interpretive possibilities of what it means when he is describing Naval as a bird of prey? What are the possibilities? What could that say? So think about what you know about birds of prey. And so think about an eagle, a falcon, how they act in the world, and what would that then be saying about Naval and how he reacted? Sarah. Okay, so that's interesting if you add that layer about, does that imply he's not kosher? Yeah. What else? Think about how what are some of the characteristics of birds of prey? Okay. So some other characteristics. So hunt alone, what else? Okay, right, see above. And then what do they see? They see something. So if you imagine like a falcon or a bird of prey flying up above, sees, let's say, a mouse. What's the bird of prey gonna do? What? Well, helpless, right? But what's gonna be the response? Sees a target, swoop down. So it's both swift and fast and attacking, aggressive. So those are all kind of some of the possibilities. Is it, but the speed of which he responded, like he just right away kind of attacked. So kind of all of that, both being aggressive and attacking David, and again, notice the contrast, levarech. David came very polite to greet them. He's treating them nicely, and Naval just swoops down on them. So it's both the kind of the speed in which he just really viscerally responds negatively, but it's also in this kind of aggressive attacking.
And our reading that, I think that delegation rather than
So that's a really great point, because now we've seen Ne'arim, Anashim, and now Melachim. So right, a more formal, and messengers, and clearly messengers there's no military context about that. So you can, yeah, Jason.
Yeah, like it's not.
Right. That's a good point. So the point was made that it's not a mouse, it's vulnerable something, it's the lion in this case.
This is somebody else's stuff. Giving it and making it, and feels no responsibility for the owner.
Okay. Great. So his.
So you say they have a legitimate claim.
Okay, so I want to get to the next part. We'll kind of go a little bit quicker here, and then we're going to do some Hebrew study. We're going to go till 11 here. So notice that, so he uses figurative language as a way to emphasize and really kind of bring to life. He's trying to both replay the scene quickly to Abigail and also really emphasize the point. And notice then, but he switches language in verse 17. What kind of language does the servant here use in verse 17? Look at the grammar there. And notice the ve'ata, there we have it there too. Imperatives, right? He's now at this point, okay, he set the scene. He's cleverly used language to really emphasize the point of this contrast between how Naval acted that was so out of line to the way in which David's men actually treated them when they were out in the field originally, and then when they came here. But then in verse 17, he really cuts the chase and says, look at this is what you've got to do. And there notice, he says, and know now and see what you will do, for evil has been decreed against our master and all his house, and he is a worthless man. So this is echoing the introduction when he's described as evil in his deeds, and also this negative characterization, in this case called a ben Belial. So, and then notice what happens in verse 18, what we read. So Abigail, it's not unusual in biblical narrative. Again, this is part of the economy of biblical narrative. Notice she doesn't respond with words. She responds with action. And we have here Vatemaher Abigail. So she hurries up. Watch, we're going to see her hurry up a number of times. You can think about who else rushes. Sarah, right? Or and also Rebecca in Genesis 24 too, with watering the camel. So it's this emphasis. So right away we see that she's a woman of action. She got the point. What image? So notice she gets together all of this stuff. And I want you to see here that so she gets what David wanted without the servants explicitly saying. She gets that the point here was that they wanted some payback for the protection that they provided. So she gets together all of this stuff, which is also a reflection of their wealth, which we also learn at the beginning, but also that she has control over it, right? She's able to gather all this stuff very quickly. She sends her servants, pass before me, I'm coming behind you. She's taking charge here. Then notice in verse 19, Ula Isha Naval Lo Higida. So notice this is going to happen again, where she's very strategic about not only what she says, but in this case, what she doesn't say to Nabal. She doesn't tell him this. So all of this activity is going on. She doesn't say a word to him.
And he doesn't know
Right. Who knows where he is? He's like, well, we'll see later. He's probably up already, like in a drunken stupor at this point. He's nowhere around. She doesn't tell him, which also reflects her power. Rivka, do you have Rivka Glick has a hand up here. Rivka, did you want to make a comment? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think it's interesting. There's no mention of God, but there's God language. And when we see Abigail, words almost like the other matriarchs, then it reflects as if she's going to be one of almost like the matriarchs. But here we see David almost blessing, but the other person almost acting like Lavan or something. It's almost echoes other stories, but there's no God language, but there's some hint that maybe David's a little more godly.
Good. So, well, Rivka, you're anticipating what we're going to see later, which is God language comes in quite strong a little bit later. So that's a good point. And also the way in which, particularly this description of her rushing, sets her up as being like a matriarch. Okay, so she doesn't say anything. So she's now, you kind of picture this, now it switched to the narrator describing what happens. So she's going down like on the side of the mountain. And then notice we have the vehine. This is a shift of point of view. This is a common technique on the Bible. I've just given you one example. Whereas if like the narrator, if you can kind of think about like, if I have a camera and I'm filming the scene, at the start of verse 20, I'm filming Abigail coming down the mountain, but the vehine shifts the perspective. And now we see David and his men going toward her. So you can picture this and you can see again how economically described. She's coming down one way, he's coming the other, and this is going to set us up there. So now we got to turn to page 4 and see what's going to happen. But then notice in verse 21, we switch to the narrative here, the David Amar. But this is really has the sense of David had said, right? So notice that this is the straight up Amar, the past tense. It's not the conversive Vayomer, which the Vayomer would signal sort of this happened in its narrative sequence, this and this and this. In this case, the Amar this is had said, meaning this David had said in the past. This is what David had said. Sort of, if you could take verses 21 and 22 and in essence put it after verse 13. When David said, gird his sword, is as if like, then this is what he said, but we kind of cut out of the scene at that point. So this is taking us back to what David had said to his men. And he says here now he's explaining, and you can see sort of the language here. Notice that this is a good case. We have this scribal euphemism where David is saying, in using a vow, Ko ya'aseh Elohim le'oivei David. And that's, the scribe has added in oivim here. Because what he doesn't want to say, thus shall God do to David. So David's taking a vow saying basically, thus shall you do to me, you're going to destroy me. If I don't, in the end, so here in his language is even kind of more crass here. He says, if he leaves any mashtin bakir, this is a phrase that occurs a couple of times in the David narrative. This, Tigger from Mackenzie translated here is, if I should leave from anyone who pissed against the wall. So it's this crude way to describe men, right? So he's saying, if I leave any men left, if I don't destroy every one of Naval's men, may thus God do to me. So David's taking a vow upon himself. He's basically saying, like, may God destroy me if I don't kill every one of Naval's men. So it's important. So think about then the strategy. This is also a strategy we see elsewhere in the Bible. Why does the narrator delay telling us now as opposed to in verse 13? What does it add? It really heightens the drama. Right, so again, so by placing this here, sort of going back in time and placing it here, it's reminding us what's at stake. Not only does Abigail, what she knows that Nabal has pissed off David and that she's trying to give him, but he has actually made a vow to God, and she's got to get him, and publicly too. So she's got to get him to walk back that vow and not carry out a vow. So by placing it here, it really heightens what's at stake. That's good. Well, I think the expectation is she would not be killed.
Not only for life sake for Naval service, or well-being.
Right, but in the end, we're going to see she's going to become David's wife, which might have happened anyway. Right. Yeah. 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 So notice it in verse 23, she again hurries. So again, that decisive action on her part, she rushes. And again, before we hear her talk, we see her act. She falls on her face. So this deferential action now is going to be followed by language. So I'm going to, wait, let me confer with Rainey here. So, okay, so we're gonna pause here and we're gonna sort of change the schedule a little bit. So the next thing, we're gonna do the business meeting that we were gonna do in between, right? We'll do that now. And then we'll come back and we'll do a Chavruta story, finish up the story, and then make a transition to the values and voices stuff. Okay, so a little last minute game change here. So stay tuned.
Yeshikoach. So we're going to call our business meeting to order and give a little Devar Torah at this time. Our parashah begins with the command to Moses to take a census and to count all the heads of the males 20 years and up. And the head of each tribe would stand with Moses as the census was taken. Now, Israeli scholar Rabbi Aiden Seinsaltz, Zichrono Livracha, poses a question which might seem obvious to us. Why are the answer might seem obvious to us, the question not so. He asks, why are the leaders of the Jewish people called Rosh, heads? His answer is that just as the head is the most important part of the human body, so the head is the most important part of the body politic. The head sends orders to the other parts of the body, but it's a two-way street. When a part of the body is in pain, it sends a signal to the head to register that feeling. And that's how we know how to pull our hands from a flame, or we know how to seek medical care when we're sick. So too, an authentic leader must be able to both send orders and feel and register the pain of those he or she leads. A leader must be able to respond to that pain in a productive way, in a way that heals. A true leader does not just delegate or command. A true leader is sensitive to the feelings of those who are following and responds appropriately. That's why the leaders of the Jewish people are called heads. We contemporary leaders of the Jewish community have had our work cut out for us these past 2.25 years. The world has been in pain. Our Jewish institutions have been in pain. Our congregants have been in pain. And we and our families have also been in pain. As leaders, we have felt that pain, and we've responded to that pain, and we've done our best to mitigate that pain through our advice and through our action. We all thought it would be over by now, but we're still living our lives thinking about, worrying about, and planning about the pandemic. There have been tragic losses, and there have been many kinds of grief exhibited. Grieving over loved ones, but also grieving over opportunities lost, lifestyles lost, and a concern that we don't know when the post-pandemic era will arrive or what it will look like. We have been through and are still going through the defining crisis of a generation. And when the world experiences something like a pandemic, we're all changed in a myriad of ways, often good. The ways we practice Judaism, the way we experience community, and the ways we learn and the ways we teach are already different because of the pandemic. Some of the old ways we'll miss, and some of the new ways we'll welcome. But one thing is certain, is that we will adapt and change and meet that challenge and continue to meet the challenge, because that's what we Jews do, and that's what we've always done. Our own organization, the Chicago Board of Rabbis, has not been immune to that pain. Rini did not even complete her first year as our executive when COVID struck and everything changed. Annual Kallah, sermon seminars, our monthly programs, all had to be held online as our membership struggled to meet the challenging reality of our day-to-day rabbinic work. And I want to thank, and I think we all need to thank Rini for her wonderful work, her undertaking this Herculean task of keeping our organization going through this very difficult time. Unprecedented. And I think another person who hasn't been given their due thanks is our immediate past president, Sid Helbron, for his outstanding service during this time of uncertainty as well. As vice president, Sid led the search committee that found Rini, and fortunately we were able to meet in person for that. But in May and 2019, he became president of the Board of Rabbis and served in that capacity until June of 2020, which meant that he led us in that first year plus, that first 15 months of the pandemic as well. And that wasn't an easy task either. And I want to thank our entire executive committee and all of you for hanging in there with us through all of this confusion and all of the loss and all of the adjusting that we've had to do. We'll now proceed to the business of electing our officers and the executive committee members. The nominating committee consisted of Rabbis Alan Kensky, Lisa Green, and David Walkenfeld. We thank you for doing a wonderful job in developing our slate. And we also want to thank and acknowledge Rabbis Andrea London, Margaret Frisch, and David Russo, who were members of our executive committee and are cycling off for this term. So I'm not sure how to run an election. I guess you all have the slate in front of you. We'll make this up as we go along. And I guess I'm gonna make this up. Do we have someone who will put the slate into first? Yes. Move acceptance of the slate by acclamation. Is there a second for that? I think we have the second. Seconded, okay. All in favor, aye. Aye. All opposed? The slate is accepted. Congratulations to the officers that will continue. I now want to introduce our Executive Vice President, Rabbi Rini Dickman, who's going to give us a report. Rini.
This will be relatively short. It's so great to see you in person. Thank you for making the time. And for some of you schlepping here from far and wide. And thank you to Dr. Andrea Weiss for being with us today. I just want to say that when I emailed you and asked you to come, I think I proposed the date and I said, would you come teach us? And the first email back was, yes, I would love to. And I just thought this was so easy. So thank you so much. And it's so wonderful to have you here. Just a few things I wanted to share. On the top of your schedule, you can see our new logo. I had no idea how many fonts exist in this world. I hope that you like it. If you want to see our old logo, it's still on the website, which is juf.org/CBR. What I understand about the old logo is that the three hands reaching up were to represent three movements, three denominations of Judaism, which we have moved beyond or we have added to. So the executive committee saw a few different logos and voted on this one. It's supposed to represent the waves of the lake, and the different color blues are supposed to represent the diversity of our rabbinate in Chicago. For a long time, the Chicago Board of Rabbis was very focused on congregational rabbis. And one of our goals with this new logo and with the new website that we're building is to really honor the diversity of all of the work of all of our rabbis. So I hope you like the new logo. A few words about the website, which we're really just at the beginning of, but our hope is that it's gonna have a calendar that you can go to see our events, and you won't have to always go back to check your emails. And through that calendar, you'll find recordings, and we'll update the membership list. So we're just getting started, but that's a project that we're going to be working on probably for the next year. Something that CBR does, which you may not know about, is that there is a group of us that serve the recruits at the Great Lakes Naval Base north of here. And we could really use another 1 or 2 or 3 rabbis to join that group if you're interested. We are there. It's Rabbi Steve Peskins, myself, Nina Mizrahi, Bob Feinberg, and Anita Silver, and am I missing someone? And Rabbi Belinsky is, thank you. He's a substitute. Okay, but we're up there every Friday night, 52 weeks of the year for an hour-long service, and we're there every Sunday morning from 9 to 10 to teach an Introduction to Judaism curriculum. I can tell you more about it if you're interested. It's very meaningful, and they're so grateful to us. We could use another couple of rabbis. So if every even 6 to 7 weeks, you're available to go up there on a Friday night or a Sunday morning, please talk to me. We could use a few more rabbis up there. A request regarding speakers for CBR. If your organizations are bringing in a speaker, it would be great if you let me know that that person is coming. If they're going to be here for more than 24 hours, maybe they could also meet with a group of rabbis. So just keep me posted. The last thing is that dues letters are going to go out in July, and you'll be able to pay dues either online through PayPal or a credit card or sending a check, but just wanted you to know that that is coming, and your dues help us bring speakers in and have events together. And also thank you to JUF, who is our main funder. So I'll just say, it is beautiful to see your faces in person, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Oh yes, August 24th, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove is returning to Chicago to be our speaker for our sermon seminar. More details to come. Okay, I think we are going to take maybe just a quick 10-minute break, and then we'll be back with Dr. Weiss. 10-minute break. There is a photographer here who's going to take some pictures for our new website. So if you're willing to be in a picture, that would be great.
Maybe take a picture of the Zoom group.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. We could take a picture of the Zoom group too.
So we can always remember this COVID, what COVID did to us.
We're going to come back together to continue the narrative and all the interpretive possibilities of Abigail. Before Dr. Weiss continues, I just want to offer a special thank you to my colleagues at JUF who helped make today a beautiful event. So to Sandy Kaplan and Caleb Crawford and Hannah Holman and Paula Harris, thank you so much for all your work for today. Thank you. And Dr. Andrea Weiss is ready to continue.
So we're going to regroup. It's really such a treat to be able to do this kind of what I call like the slow cooker of the text study and really, you know, lasso footy Rachel, I really delve deep. So, so we'll continue. So I appreciate the kind of length of the time to keep on. And now I want to continue in Hebruta study. So I've given you some questions. So both, and we can do this by tables. I think this will work. And Rini, can we put the folks on Zoom like in a breakout room? How do you? Okay, okay.
Break them out. I just need to know how long you want us.
Let's start with 15 minutes.
15 minutes?
Yeah, so let me just set it up and then we can do it.
I'll break them up because I'm co-host.
Okay. Okay, Neil, I'll just say, Neil, I love your background there with the dew. People can see on Zoom. Okay, so here's what we're going to do in Hebruta. I've given you some questions. So what I'd like you to start with is, Abigail's speech here has two main parts. So going back on the handout, it's on page 4 and page 5. And we want to really look, so we've seen already that we've seen David unsuccessfully use rhetoric to try to use language to try to get what the desired outcome. We've seen the servant successfully do that, successfully use language, and particularly an interplay of figurative and non-figurative language to accomplish his goal, which is to make Abigail act. And now we've seen the situation that she's in, which is she's got to get David, who's coming at her with 400 men, swords girded, public vow to destroy all of Naval's men. And how is she going to stop that from happening? So we've seen her get off of her donkey here, bowing down. So she's already physically putting herself in a deferential position. And now she's going to speak up. And I want you to look at how she uses her words. So these are the Hebruta questions for you to look at. So with particular attention here, and the coloring, the highlighting will help you. How does Abigail refer to David? How does she refer to herself? What's the impact of that? And how does she describe who's responsible for what happens? And in general, and then I've given you some other passages where we see a similar rhetorical strategy, so you can see what those passages have in common. And this Rivka on Zoom mentioned earlier about in this case, the absence of reference to God. We're going to see Abigail refer to God. So what is going on there? What impression? How is she referring to God, and what's the intended outcome and impression there? And then just in general, what other rhetorical strategies does Abigail use to prevent David from carrying out his vow? So we'll take about 15 minutes. So we'll call it close to 11:30. So we'll go to 11:45. The folks on Zoom in breakout rooms, and then which Michelle, I think you're going to do. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then here by table, and I'll circulate around and see what you have to say. So get to work. Okay, we're gonna regroup. I heard some good conversations. Looks like everyone's back on Zoom. So Michelle, thank you for the breakout rooms. I hope people had good conversations. Yeah. Okay, so let's regroup. So let's start with the strategy that what you observed about the strategy. Let's take some general observations about Abigail's rhetorical strategies. What are some things, what are some ways in which she is trying to accomplish, trying to keep David from following through on her vow? What did you notice about how she's using language?
So it really seems to me that it's kind of Galatians are gonna say it's because you couldn't keep them alive. And she says, where is it? Don't fall into the trap. Where is that?
31?
There's something back, yeah, 31. What the other without following the show, et cetera. That seems to me that it's like not gonna, you're gonna look bad.
Okay, so the comment here, just for the folks on Zoom, that the idea that in verse 31, like this is going to look bad on you. So similar to Moses trying to convince God. And she definitely argues this idea that, well, and she says it explicitly here. She says, in sort of the opposite, that God will be good, you know, sort of there's both incentive and disincentive that's used in this case. Other observations? And if folks on Zoom want to raise a hand, join the conversation. Michelle.
So I have a question and also a comment. I do think that this is probably not her first rodeo with navigating the challenges of being married to such a man. And so the fact that she says, well, this is my fault, and had I been here, we wouldn't, you know, have made it to this point. And so I think she knows what she's doing. I don't think this is the first time, you know, figuring out management of her husband. The other question I had was just in terms of how she refers to herself.
Michelle, wait, before you do that, I just want to repeat the comment in case everyone didn't hear it. Michelle made the point that likely isn't, as she said, her first rodeo, which is something really, I had never thought about that before, about what it means to be married to the type of person that Naval is, and the way in which she, you know, in the past also may have needed to clean up his messes. So when you think about her rushing and the way in which she is, you know, that's I just think a super interesting point, Michelle, that I hadn't thought about the way in which her past, you know, just that she may have done this in the past and sort of was predisposed to sort of realize what she had to do. So nice point.
And then I just have a question for you, because I don't have like a BDB at home. It's in my office. Is she usually refers to herself as an amma, but right in the middle refers to herself as a shivcha. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
It's a good observation. I don't really have an explanation. I don't have a good, so it's a good observation. I don't have a good explanation as to any significant, like what the significance in the shift is. And this is so that you can see this is at in 27. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have to do a little, you stumped me on that, Michelle. I have to do a little bit more research on that to figure out what, if there might be some significance in that. So if I figure something out, I'll let you know. Yeah, Wendy. So let me, before you go on, so just for the folks on Zoom, Wendy made the point that what she's willing to claim for herself, that her husband isn't one of them. So elaborate a little bit what you mean there.
There's no association. She'll state his name. She thinks a negative descriptor embedded within his name.
Right. We really see this in verse. Look at the language in 25. Notice each. Yeah.
You know, this worthless man, there's no connectivity.
Yeah, and one little word that even reinforces Wendy's point there is the hazeh, right? So if you can think of how zeh gets used in the Bible, like that's really, we really see it there. And she repeats the Ish B'li Baal, which is what the servant, picking up on how the servant described him, but then adding Hazeh, and then making the name that he's like his name. So really making that explicit. So both, so that's an important piece there. So of her distancing, both denigrating him, which again, in contrast, also we've seen that fits with the contrast that we've seen from the beginning. Rivka.
Yeah, I think the denigration, I was struck by the juxtaposition. There's the denigration of the husband just juxtaposed against the belief in God. The words about, the life of Yud Bave by your life. So Ellen used a beautiful word, discernment, that she can discern good from evil, which is a higher kind of wisdom, I think. And so she also is in touch. First, she says it's her words and her actions, but then she turns it to God. And so she knows her destiny here. So
Good.
she's in touch with the story and the destiny. But I think the juxtaposition, it isn't that she's bad-mouthing her husband as much as she's discerning good from evil. And I'm not sure yet if she takes it as her God, because in one of the phrases, it's your God, but she does understand, have a fear of God, and some belief in God is forming. I don't know if she takes it on as her God yet, though.
Well, I'd say if you look in verse 26, so Rivka is making the point of what is Abigail's relationship here to God, and I think verse 26 is key. So notice first of all, what's the language that she uses. So first, I forget who had mentioned the Vata earlier. So notice it's used here as well in verse 26. Vata, Adonai, hi Adonai, hi nafshachai. So she's also taking this oath, this vow. So that similar kind of language again, which conveys the seriousness. And then, but what does it mean if she claims here that Adonai has prevented you from coming into blood guilt and has rescued you? Where does that position her? Right, so either a messenger or a prophet, right? If she's basically saying that God has prevented you from doing this, well, what is the means in which David is being prevented from?
Many motivations here which aren't really clear in the text. Number one, maybe she came there and she's just saying what she wants David to hear, because maybe she wants to save her life and her husband's life. That could be one motivation. Another motivation could be that she wants to save David himself from the blood guilt. Another motivation could be, that she has further plans ahead, and David could be spoiling her further plans if he went and did this. So I think there are different motivations that aren't clear in the text.
Right. So this a little bit ambiguous is what's driving her, and to what extent is she both trying to save herself and all the other people and her husband. So when you look at the end of the story, so just kind of on this, we'll sort of skip ahead to this point. Look at what she does at the end after she's successful and she keeps David from, and David feels grateful that he's not carried out his vow. So notice she comes to Naval, he's having a feast as would be common after sheep shearing. And then notice the reference again to, here we have to heart. So notice the Lev Naval Tov, Alav. So his heart, he's in a good, he's drunk and in a, in a good state, and tells us also that he's drunk. And notice here, Velo Higida Lo Devar, just as at the beginning, she was we are using her seichel, she was very smart about what she tells him. She doesn't tell him then, so she doesn't tell him anything till morning. Why not? Why do you think she waited why do you think she didn't tell him what happened? She didn't rush back and tell him. She comes back, he's at the festival. Why do you think she doesn't tell him then? What? Okay, so what would be the reaction that he might take out on her?
Seems like her praying in the past, and if he created, that seems to be and in public.
Good. So how would he respond to her? So notice that she's clever that. And then it says, then in the morning when he's woken up with a hangover here. And that's when she tells him, And notice there, we looked at this earlier, that's when his heart dies within him and he becomes like a stone, whether that's a stroke, a heart attack. And then, but this is interesting, it's after 10 days, so she doesn't actually kill him from that. 10 days later, and it's very explicit there, that God's the one who strikes him down, and then he dies. So if her motivation was to save both her and her husband, she's only successful on the beginning, but did she perhaps see this? This is what another table was talking about. To what extent did she anticipate that this might be a way not only to save Naval's men, so the larger group that she feels responsible for, but also maybe to end up with a different and better husband, even though, and as we also talked about with the group in the back, that David benefits tremendously from this union because she brings all the wealth.
David says basically, take care of your enemies. Feels like Nathan, if he had come before David slept with Bathsheba, right? This is Abigail coming ahead of time to save David from sin. So that's how I think the text is positioning her as this prophetic voice without the direct words of God speaking to us.
Nice, and so the comparison, I like the comparison too with Nathan, and that's further putting her in this like prophetic advisor role.
Slingshot and bringing a deep cut from David's background. I know exactly who you are. I'm not.
Good. So I want to talk. Let's spend a little bit of time on that verse 29. Here, so she. Okay, so we see in verse 28. Notice what she does in both in verse 28 and also in verse. What does she do in verse 24 and 28 before we get to the slingshot? When she says here, be ani Adoni ha'avon in 24, and then she says here also where she has sana lefesha amatecha. What's she doing there? What's her strategy? Yeah, she takes on the blame. She's willing to take the blame. What do you think is the effect of that when she says, forgive me, the sin's on me? Right, so she both taking, right, so she's owning it. We also see that she then later distances herself too, but when she says she's not there. But what do you think for the effect of David to have someone say, you know, the sin's on me? Forgive, Ilana? Right, so that's an interesting point, Alana's too, in terms of the way in which his later language when we hear his vow, he is mirroring the language that Naval uses and the way in which then he's treating Abigail the way that she's treating him. And yeah. So I want you to see the way in which she takes on the blame, but also at the same time in verse 25 makes it clear that she isn't to blame because she wasn't there, but sort of in which she's both saying, okay, there was a wrong that was committed. She's willing to take it. And then I brought these other passages where we see that as well. Other women in the Bible who are also have that similar strategy, who are willing to sort of to take on the guilt in this case, in a way that that lowers the temperature of the situation because someone had said there was a wrong. I'm going to take responsibility for it. So she starts with that each time. I want to look at the language in verse 29 and is important. And I have a whole chapter on this in my book because you can see the use of metaphor here. She says, so should a man rise and seek your life? And so she has the vow here. She says here that Vatihi nefesh Adonai tzrura bitzror hachayim et Adonai Elohecha. Okay, it goes on. So, and you can see Ticker from Merkensky's translation here is the life of my Lord, meaning David, will be tied in the book of the living. So she's reading bundle here that's for as a bundle, meaning a document or book, right? Think of being inscribed in the book of life. But the other way to read it, and you can see if you look at Robert Alter's translation there, he writes in his commentary, more plausible identification is the pouch in which little stones keeping a tally of live sheep were placed. So think about this, if you read it that way, and to see the bundle as stones, that's actually then, I make the argument that that's the better reading of this metaphor here, because if he's meaning, so what a shepherd would have a pouch, and how would the shepherd keep track of the live sheep? Would have stones. So, and if you would lose it, so let's say you have 20 sheep, you have 20 little stones in a pouch, how are you going to keep track? So one sheep goes astray or is killed by some animal, then you take a pebble out, and that's how you know you now have 19. So if the stones in the pouch signify the live being, then what she's saying is here, may you be like, so now it's imagine God as a shepherd who has this pouch of stones, and every living being is a stone. And so what she's saying is, may you be one of those stones, meaning may you stay alive. But think then how clever that is, because then stones have, and he will hurl away the life of your enemy with the slingshot. So we all know that David is famous for the slingshot. So maybe, so the opposite, David's going to stay alive, but the enemy, God is going to take like a stone and sling it away. This also connects now back at the end. How does what happens to Nabal? He becomes like an Eved, right? So you see the way in which very cleverly this stone, that motif runs through.
And in the narrative itself, David, before slaying Goliath, walks by a stream and picks up some rocks and puts it in his shepherd's pouch or whatever.
Nice.
So it's
Very nice. So I want to draw this to a close. I hope I've convinced you to see how clever Abigail is in her use of rhetoric and what a rhetorical masterpiece this is. And you can see right away in verse 22 how, unlike David, she's successful, because he begins Baruch Adonai, right? So he twice, and in 33, he twice blesses her, thanks God for bringing her so that he's eventually saved. And we have the happy ending at the end where David again blesses God for sending Abigail to him, and that's the way it ends. And so look in verse 42. The last reference to Abigail hurrying. In this case, she's hurrying to become David's wife, so that the image of her hurrying is also a thread that runs throughout. And you can see I just had just to put this story in its larger context, the way in which where Abigail sits in David's other wives, and the story about other wives, and the way in which his wives, we see David's progression over time in terms of the different kinds of wives that he selects. So that's another way to look at it. So we spent a lot of time here really delving in to this chapter, which I think is just such a great example of the literary artistry of the Bible, and how language can be used. And this further, I think, enhances the idea of If you think about the prophets, I mean, that's the role of the prophets, is to use language to get people to either do what they don't want to do or to stop doing what they're doing. And the tools that the prophets use is language. And in that way too, we very much see Abigail in this prophetic role and her artful use of language successfully to get David not to carry out his vow. So I hope you've enjoyed this sort of a rich engagement with the text. We're now going to shift to another very different form of using language, of how we can use of language, also to attempt at persuasion. Whether that was successful, not as clear. So I'm going to switch over here. So this is a big shift, and I guess sort of in context, it's also reflective of this whole project that I'll now share with you, and because I want to share with you as a resource for your rabbinate. This was also a very sudden shift in my career. So you've seen from this text study that most of my work is on the Bible and literary aspects of the Bible, and I was, and the big project that I've been working on is my work, as I mentioned before, is on metaphor, and that's how I first got into this chapter. In my dissertation, I studied with Jeff Teagate at the University of Pennsylvania. My dissertation was on metaphor in the Bible, and then my more recent work has been a very comprehensive study of metaphors for God in the Bible. My former students have delved into those texts with me in my teaching of the prophets in particular. And that work is, that study is on the metaphors for God in the Bible, the theology and the mechanics of metaphor. So hopefully one day that book will come to life. But while I was working on that, the 2016 election happened. And that ended up taking my career in quite a different way. So I'm gonna pretty quickly walk you through. I've got a long PowerPoint. Now, can folks on Zoom see it, or how do we? Okay, I'm gonna, can I put it up here? Will they? Or maybe if we put it on a chair. Okay, Vinny's gonna. So why don't you fiddle with seeing how the folks on Zoom can see the PowerPoint? Okay, so I have a lot of slides and I walk through because I want to get to explaining also that's the main. So it's a project that literally
Hey Ryan. Hey, how are you? I just don't think they're gonna see that well. She knows without when I say computer and not this computer. They're just gonna listen. Thank you.
That we're thinking about on that. How important it is to know our sacred text, that we need to rely on it. I was thinking about that, and I was also thinking about throughout the campaign of the summer. So I live in a state and have grown up in California and worked for many years in New York. Discovered what it meant to live in more anxiety. But the experience that I'm also just in 2016 campaigns, the way in which just so many values that I've always taken for granted called into question. That we should be accepted in the wrong and we should so many of our values How many of our, okay.
Let's just do this.
How many of our core American values are connected to our different religious traditions? So I thought, what if we could get scholars of religion who really know these sacred texts, who could speak to our American values and the way in which they're connected to our different religious traditions and sacred texts. So I had this idea that we would get this multi-faith group of scholars together who would send a letter a day to the president, to the folks in Washington. So I had this idea, it's really far-fetched. And so I walked down the street to my neighbor, Mark Smith, that day, by walking my dog Friday after the election. I knocked on his door and I said, Mark, I have this idea, what do you think? And he was at NYU, now at Princeton Theological Seminary. And he thought for a minute and he said, I think it's a good idea and I'll help you. And I've said to him later, if he had said anything, that this is what it means to be a mentor, because if he had said anything other than that, if he said what it was, if he had really said, that's a totally far-fetched idea, I don't see how you're ever going to do it, I would have, I have a lot of ideas on any given day, most of which evaporate. But in this case, because he said that, I held on to it for another day or two. I went to the Hebrew Union College in New York where we had a symposium, and I made a beeline to to Rabbi Aaron Pankin, Zichrono Livracha, then our president. I said, Aaron, I have this idea. I think I probably, and by the way, I was not on social media. I'm really not technologically savvy. I also am a Hebrew Bible scholar at a Jewish seminary who went to the University of Pennsylvania. I have almost no interfaith connections at the time. So another reason why it was far-fetched, but I said, I had this idea and I think I'll need some student interns to help me do a website or something. And I said, maybe I think it'll cost about $5,000. Would you support it? And he thought about it, and the next day he came back and he said, give it a shot. And why? Because he really believed in this idea of thought leadership, that the work that scholars do can make a difference in the world. And that is core to what we do at HUC and at other seminaries, to taking the scholarship and making it accessible. So my next contact was an old friend of mine in Philadelphia, Lisa Weinberg, who's a graphic designer and has her own graphic design company. And I wrote her a letter. You can see this is from November 16th. And on this long letter, well, the subject is 2 questions. First, I asked if she'll watch my dog, okay? Because we were going away from the weekend, which she'd never done before, but I'd recently learned how much she loved dogs. So you'll see from this, the theme is that I had a lot of chutzpah. So the second thing is I tell her this idea, that I had this idea, and it's called Scripture Teaches 100 Days, 100 Scholars of the Book. That was the idea. And I think I need a website, and I don't really know what else. And if I had no idea what I was asking her at the time. She knew, and she wrote back this, I'm in for both. And I later said to her, Lisa, I didn't know what I was asking. You knew what this would involve. Why did you say yes? And she said she felt like she had a hole in her heart. And she thought to herself, what could she do as a graphic designer that would make a difference? And all of a sudden, out of the blue, my email comes saying, do you want to be part of this project? And she said yes. So then I set off the next week, a couple of days later, to the Society of Biblical Literature, American Academy of Religion. I had a notebook, and I was pretty persistent. Everyone I met, I was pitching my idea and saying, who do you know that might want to write a letter? Would you want to write a letter? Who would you want? I went to all of these sessions that I normally would not go to try to like the African-American biblical hermeneutics, to see who was giving papers, who might want to write. And I came, and so I had a long list of names after that. And I then put together an advisory committee to help me put this project together. And I want to say at the beginning that one of the reasons I went into this feeling that I was willing to fail, but I didn't want to regret that I didn't try. And by the way, there's Dan just as a PS, if you're not Brene Brown fans, Brene Brown has a great interview with this guy, Dan Pink, who has a book on regret, which so she interviews on regret. But that was really it. I didn't want to regret that I had the idea and didn't make it happen. So I put together the advisory committee. So it's my neighbor, Mark, Deirdre Good, who's a New Testament scholar who had reached out to me to be involved in something else. Herbert Marbury, I met at the SBL from stalking the sessions. Elsie Stern on the bottom middle, we were friends from Camp Swig. This is some of you, she's the vice president at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College at the time, also a Bible scholar from University of Chicago, so connected here. And Hussein Rashid, who's a independent Islamic scholar. I just started asking, who do people know? And I wrote him and he got involved. So while I was putting that together, we were starting to figure out what this project would look like. Lisa was hard at work. Elsie and Lisa and I met the Sunday after Thanksgiving. We came up with a much better name, American Values, Religious Voices, and Lisa designed the color palette, the graphics. She recruited someone to do the website, and within a few days I had a Twitter account, Instagram, Facebook. I had no idea what to do with them, but I eventually learned. And then we sent out on December 2nd, letters to about 100 people. We had a list, and this is what we asked people: what passages from your religious tradition have you been thinking about in the wake of the election? What issues most concern you, and how does your religious heritage speak to those concerns? What message rooted in the text you study and teach would you most like to deliver to our national leaders and to a wider interfaith audience, many of whom long for guidance, inspiration, and a reaffirmation of what it means to be an American? So with that, we sent them out and started getting back yeses and nos. This was my super high-tech way. I had like this big packet that I kept adding more pages to. So this is my super high-tech way that I kept my tally. And while people said yes, we started generating material for our social media campaign. You can see how diverse, just from this alone, this tile, including Carmen Nenko Fernandez, some of you may know from Chicago Theological Seminary, or Shalom Holtz, who's at Yeshiva University. And it took 50 days and 100 invitations and a lot of follow-up nudging invitations. Did you get my email? What do you think? So literally on day one of the campaign, which was the inauguration, we got our 100th letter writer. And this gives you a sense, this is from Elsie Stern's letter 100, of the diversity of our letter writers. The American Values, Religious Voices letter writers provide a snapshot of the America that you have pledged to serve. We are men and women from red states and blue states. We identify as African American, Asian, Latinx, Native American, and white. We are Buddhists, Christians, varied denominations, Hindus, Jews, and I should add Jews of varied denominations, Muslims, and Sikhs. Some of our families have been in this country since before it was America. Others are immigrants ourselves. When I had the original idea of doing this project, I thought, what if we could both get all these 100 people, but also put all their pictures on one page? And thanks to Lisa and the guy who did the website, this was on the homepage of our website. And Lisa sent this to me originally, and it's still, I find it so moving to really show the tremendous diversity that makes our country great. So that's a little bit about how the campaign came about. I'm going to quickly talk about how it worked. So we broke things up by week. We scheduled the letters week by week, and we tried to make each week as diverse as possible and have the letters be responsive to things as they were unfolding. So the inauguration was on a Friday, so every Thursday we published this tile that gave a sense of the letters that were coming. The letters came up on our website at 5 a.m. That was a rookie mistake on my part. That meant I was getting up at 4:50 for 100 days. Even though it was all scheduled on the computer, but I still got up every day to make, because there were still typos and almost missteps. So the letter every day came up on our website, and people, were any subscribers here? So some subscribers. So if you were, what? Yeah, HUC publicized a lot. So if you were a subscriber, we had about over 2,000 subscribers. You're going to email every day saying today's letter one, day one, letter one. So that's how one way the letters got about. I'm going to skip this. Is about my letter. We also published them on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter every day, which I had interns for, but I learned that my rabbinic student interns were not up at 5 o'clock, so I ended up taking that on. So, and we had a tile for every letter. We had a pull quote, and that's what we put on social media. It's one of my favorites from Mark Bretler. And this to me really gets at sort of what this project's all about, that standing idly by or arguing that someone else should step up is not an option. This became my way of stepping up. And the third way the letters got out is that every day I would print them out, one dear President Trump and the other dear to the Vice President. And I would print them out and mail them. And that you're going to see when we get to the second campaign, which we did this past year. I have, in the intervening 4 years, I have a different dog, sadly, but this is my dog, Sophie, who we mailed them every day. So that's a bit how the campaign operated. So that's all the stuff we planned. That's how we planned for the campaign to work. What we didn't anticipate that went along was how much the idea of the campaign was to get the letters out to people. We didn't realize how much feedback we would be getting. And so and as people through social media or different texting or email, people shared with us the way that they were responding to the campaign in real time. And so I would send stuff to Lisa, email I got, a text message, and she would say, well, should I turn art and should I make it into art? And I said, the answer to that question is always yes. And this became part of what we would use on social media as a way to share how people were experiencing the campaign. And one of the questions we'll get to, and you can see the way so this is one of my favorites, the way that people, this is a friend of mine wrote, I'm loving my daily inspirational letters from voices I'm not accustomed to hearing. So the idea that this, in a very accessible way, brought in scripture and other traditions, other teachings from other religious faiths. So I'll just quickly say, did anyone in Washington respond? We got one. So we sent 100 letters. So for 100 days, we wrote to all the chiefs of staffs and legislative directors of every members of Congress. It's over 1,000 people. One responded. So I'm not going to, we don't have the time to go through now, but she took issue with this one letter where, and then the letter writer wrote back, and then she said, keep the letters coming. People are reading them. They help to make sense of the world we live in today and remind us of the world we want to live in tomorrow. So that took place on day 24, pretty early on in the campaign. So that really helped keep us going throughout. And the other thing that happened on that same day, turned out, was I got an email from one of my friends, actually someone I became friendly with from working, a Bible colleague. And she wrote to me to say that she went to church that day, and someone came up to her and shared that he's a Democrat living in New York, and his brother's a Trump supporter in Oklahoma at Oral Roberts University. They stopped talking during the campaign, but they had started talking again about the letters. And I think this represents the potential of this kind of project as a way that people could be in conversation about the things that we do agree about. So we ended up running the campaign for 100 really crazy days. I should add, my son's bar mitzvah was on day 74. Another reason why it was a crazy idea. We went to Israel after that. So the whole idea was kind of nutty. Lisa and I, so this is celebrating on day 101. I had, after the campaign, this great collection of all of this art that had been produced. And also our social media account. So we were active on social media for about another year. We published the letters as a book by University of Cincinnati Press. And so to show it here for folks on Zoom. And I thought then the campaign was over. Very successful beyond my wildest dreams that we had produced this, and it had just been very meaningful to be in connection with the letter writers, the readers, and it just felt like a very generative, positive response to the 2016 election. And publishing the book was, which also I'll share, was the book is dedicated in Rabbi Pankin's memory, and that also was really moving to me to be able to publish it in his memory as part of his legacy. So that was it. I thought we were all done. And then 2020 happened. And in the days while we were waiting out the results of the election, I kind of thought to myself, here, we're going through a pandemic. It's clear our country is just as divided as ever. And so I started thinking, you know, we have the website, we have all the social media platform, maybe we could do it again. But I knew my current position as provost, I certainly couldn't do it on my own. So I called my daughter, that's Rebecca, which some folks who've known her since, some students who've known her since she was little wouldn't recognize her. And she was a senior at Williams College at the time, and I called her up, and she's editor of her paper and English major. So I said, Rebecca, how would you like to be my editorial assistant and do this project with me? And could you get some friends who could do the social media stuff and the art? And so within a few hours, we had our Values and Voices interns, our Williams College campaign staff, and Lisa agreed to be involved again. And she got more involved than originally she thought she would. We got a nice grant from the Lippman Camphor Foundation that supported the project and allowed us to redo the website. We launched on Inauguration Day of 2021, this time with the letters addressed to Dear President Biden, Vice President Harris, members of Congress. On December 2nd, the exact same date, 4 years later, we sent out nearly the same invitation to our same 100 letter writers. In the end, about 50 of them said yes and wrote a second letter. And on the first day that I sent the invitation out, about a quarter of those people wrote back and said thank you, because it was very meaningful. People wanted to have an avenue to share their insights. So again, my new dog, Jordy, we did the same thing, but we had some new components this time. We asked people, and as you can see, we're in a Zoom pandemic world, so we asked people to record themselves, and my daughter had the technology to be able to handle that part of it, and we revised the website so that we can handle it. So we have videos of about half, maybe half or three quarters. We have people recording them. You know, you can see this picture, you can pick this out of being, I think like over time, you'll be able to see this as like such a pandemic era picture of someone on Zoom, you know, being a professional in his house. So, and the videos just really bring the letters to life in a new way. You can hear people's voices, and just, so that was a great way. We had someone in the arts in Philadelphia who contacted us and said, I could hear these letters being sung and being read, and he organized with our help this, we brought together all these actors and singers and our local Philadelphia Congressman Dwight Evans, and we had a Zoom event on President's Day. So you can see David Strathairn, who's a Academy Award nominee actor, read Mark Brettler's amazing letter, which we don't have time for now. But that's a pretty amazing letter. We had someone who wrote an original song for it. These are all on our website, which I'm going to skip over now. We did more Zoom events. The big highlight for me was we had an article this time in the Washington Post with the first campaign. The New York Times was going to write about the article and had sent a photographer to my house and took pictures of me in 2017, and the article never came out. But so I was really happy that with this Washington Post piece, the article got got its due, and we had a recording on the BBC and a number of other publicity. We did get, interesting enough, like 2 months later, I got this big batch of letters from the Vice President's office. They were all the same response, but at least I'll take what we can get. So now to what I want to get at is, how can you use this as a resource for your RAVNet? So my whole point in bringing this. So when we put on our original website in 2017, as we put the letters on the website, we had these values that we would track. So when I would upload the letters, I'd pick out 3 or 4 words that were themes in the letters. And so when we published the book, we had these 2-page spreads where we highlight some of the top values, like justice, for example, is the most, and the letters. So that's an easy way you can put the letters in conversation with each other in the book. And this will just kind of give you a sense on the second book, which we're working on now. We'll do some comparison. But what I want to do for purposes of time is to go on the, Lisa, what, you know, let me see if I can, I hope get on the website. and actually show you how you can use it. Let's see. Yeah, okay, Ryan can help me here. So how do, well, maybe if I just, oh, here, okay, here we go. Okay, so this is our website, valuesandvoices.com. So, and what you'll see, so this tells you a little bit about the campaign. Here, where it says read our letters, we'll get you to the 2021 letters, so you could read them in order, or on here is the 2017 letters. So all the letters are on the website. But going back to the home page, you can see here's our authors. So, but now we added with you can see it'll flip, and that's how you can. So if you want to look at a particular letter writer and you can read, you can click on their letters. So that's one way to get to the authors. And again, you can just see, I love looking at the diversity of it. But the other great way is the search function. Well, and I'll show you on the letters, if you go this values tab, this is where we've categorized them, but the much better way to get is through the search. So someone give me a topic that you're writing, maybe writing a sermon on or an article. Okay, that one is going to be a little harder, but. Okay, so this I happen to know. So this is Jennifer Kusid, and that by searching for that brought up the letter, and her letter is exactly on reproductive justice. And in this case, also, if you go back and look at her so if you were to look up, let's see another word, her 2017 letter is on a similar topic, which she also references here. So you could also get to it as well. So that's a resource. So someone else, another topic. Oh, that's a good one. Okay, so in this case, you can see all the letters that are about Revelation up, and the first letters that come up are the 2021 letters, and then where it says blog posts, those are the archived the 2017 letters. So what this enables you to do, so now you're watching, you want to write about Revelation. So if you just click on all these letters, you can then put in conversation all of these different letter writers who are writing in the word is in some way referenced in here. So you could, that's way that you could put them. So there's Brian Rainey, Jacqueline Hidalgo, taking another spin on Revelation in some sense. Eric Barreto, you can watch their videos too. And again, so you can, it's a great way to pair what different religious scholars have to say about Revelation. We'll take one more topic. Anyone else? Wait, what? War. Okay. Okay, you can see a number of letters that come up. So this is really what I wanted to share with you, and hope that you will, it's a tremendous resource. And the other thing that we have, which you can get to from our Take Action page, if you scroll down here, is a prayer for our country. And we actually have two, I think, and we also have status, but we don't have our most recent one. But that's that is also what we have. And I wanted to end by reading that. And with that, well, first before that, does anyone have any questions? So we've done a couple things. We had an Atlanta gathering. We haven't had a lot of folks in Atlanta. I could do a great one in Chicago. If anyone wants to invite me back to organize that. And we're working on a second book, hopefully, that'll come out this fall. So we did an Atlanta gathering with about 9 people, and then at the Society of Biblical Literature, we also had a gathering with a bunch of folks, and that was neat for people to read their letters and talk about. We've had a lot of different panels, especially over Zoom, to people to read their letters and talking about what it meant for them. I love being able to raise those conversations. Other questions? So the question was political diversity. It's interesting because certain things, and it was interesting also like how my notion of diversity changed 4 years later, and also working with younger people. So I had, just what diversity meant. So when I started the project the first time, this is what I don't show on the PowerPoint. I kept these tallies, white Christian male, African-American Muslim, just all these sort of categories, because I was trying, as we were evolving and trying to get people, trying to keep it diverse, but also recognizing that it wasn't going to be an ideal list, because in both cases, we had a very limited amount of time to just try to get people to say yes, and it was going to be imperfect, but it ended up being rather diverse. But the harder things to know about people, so I'm like looking up, people's websites, and you can see, from what information about them, sort of what their background is, religious, racial, et cetera. But it's really hard to figure out people's political backgrounds. So this time around, I specifically asked for that. So we have, in fact, one of our colleagues, who's a professor at HUC in LA, Josh Garraway, at an event, he said to me, he read his letter. He said, I want to share, I'm a Republican. And I said, Josh, I'm so glad you said that, because at least now I can, with some sense of, I can say that it's diverse. And so I specifically reached out to people to try to get more political diversity. But that is, ironically, I think one of people's identities that it's not always easy to find that out. But we tried to be as perspective. So I want to end with the prayer for the country, which is also in the book. And with that, we'll end, and just also end with gratitude to inviting me to come and to be able to share this project and to be able to study Torah together. And this letter was taken. I was asked to read for the prayer for the country at ordination. So this would have been in 2017, and put this together for that. And so this is a different sentence from different letters. Every inch of America is sacred, from sea to shining sea. There is much to be done in our time, the sort of hard work on which God smiles, because it is done for the sake of the dignity and well-being of all God's creatures. Together, let us work to preserve and make manifest the values upon which our democracy was founded. The task of all people of faith is to call governing authorities to fulfill God's purpose of bringing about justice, mercy, and peace. Individually and as a nation, may we heed our obligations to each other as we navigate the tensions of building a just society. Rather than a politics of divisiveness, may we move our country toward a politics of empathy. May we use our power well, so we do great things for all God's creatures, all those made in God's image who yearn for an equal place at America's table. If we do all this, may grace and peace be ours in abundance. May we be a beacon and a blessing to the world.
Amen.
Thanks to those on Zoom who stuck it out, even though sort of with the not being able to see the presentation.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you for coming and being with us, teaching us, and inspiring us. Thank you for showing us that scholarship can make change in the world. Thank you. Please stay for lunch if you can, or grab a lunch to go. And have a wonderful summer. Shavuot Sameach. And thank you for being here.
So the website is valuesandvoices.com.
That was really beautiful. Thank you. We're going to get a picture.
Glad you could make it, Ben.
Yes, thanks for
Thank you.